Hey there, I'm Sam Tolman. I'm one of the facilitators and co-founders of the Diabetes Sangha, and I'm going to be guiding you through the next 5 weeks as we explore the relationships between diabetes and meditation and get a little bit more into the strategies of how to practice this thing, especially in our lives with diabetes. So, week 1 is a little bit about definitions. It's about diabetes and meditation, so I'm going to assume that you know what diabetes is and you have an intimate relationship with it. But how about mindfulness in particular? We'll be talking a lot about mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Well, certainly all of us have heard of it. It seems like you can hardly cross the street these days without hearing about mindful something or other. Someone trying to sell you their mindful something that will perhaps boost your calm or help you get Zen. Whatever that means. Or sometimes mindfulness is used kind of interchangeably with attention. So something I often hear, we have to be mindful of. Sometimes I hear that in a work context. And sometimes I wonder, is this person really saying we have to cultivate a non-judgmental moment-to-moment awareness of what our customer thinks in the service of self-understanding and wisdom? It's possible. But something tells me that's probably not what most people mean when they say mindful of whatever. So what are we saying when we talk about mindfulness? Many people have defined mindfulness in English, and there's many wonderful ways to talk about it. So in the joke that I just made about hearing be mindful of this in a work environment, I used part of John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness. So I invite you actually, even now, to pause this video and Google some definitions of mindfulness if you're interested, just to see what comes up. Perhaps one of these resonates more than another with you. What's most important about mindfulness, though, and the reason why so many of these definitions work, is that it's actually an experience, and it's about your experience. So each of these definitions can give you a description of the experience and kind of point you in the right direction. But in order to really define it, you have to have it in your own experience. You have to kind of sit with it over time, learn from it, and understand it in your own way. But that said, we need a place to start from. So for the time being, let's start with this definition. Let's say mindfulness is the experience of being both aware of and receptive to whatever your experience is right now. So I'll say that again. Mindfulness is the experience of being both aware of and receptive to whatever your experience is right now. So to go even further with that, the word mindfulness in its original language could come from Sanskrit or Pali. There's words for mindfulness. So they share a root with this word of memory in those languages. So that's kind of another clue for us. There's something important about mindfulness that has to do with coming back repeatedly, remembering. So that's really core to what it is. It's so core that it's actually the root of the word for mindfulness. So let's find a way to add that in. Perhaps mindfulness is the experience of being both aware of and receptive to whatever your experience is right now, and remembering to continue to come back to this awareness and receptivity of your experience right now. So that's kind of a mouthful. We've added in this third component. So basically now we have 3 components of mindfulness. We can say there's an attention component. That's the awareness part. There's an intention component. So that's the way we want to be. That's being receptive, being open. And there's a retention component. So attention, intention, and retention. What's the retention part? Retention is the way that we try our best to remember what we're doing, and we're going to forget. That's part of it. That's part of the challenge, probably the biggest part of the challenge, certainly to start. So knowing that's part of it, we come back over and over when we forget. We try our best to remember. So that's mindfulness in words. But in the next few weeks, your job is to find mindfulness in your own experience. Aware and receptive of right now remembering right now. That's our starting place. Mindfulness, as I'll describe and work with in these next few weeks, comes largely from Buddhist meditation traditions. But when you really consider it, it's really part of every culture and tradition in its own way. So every culture has its own way of taking time to commit fully to something that's happening right now. Whether it's watching a sunrise or a sunset, or being fully engaged with your mind and body while you're dancing, or singing in praise or celebration, or something else. These are all ways of bringing full attention to your experience in this moment. Often, like in those examples, you'll find this in specific rituals. But in this case, we bring that ritual to our whole lives, and we make our whole lives, diabetes included, a kind of practice or even a celebration. Okay, so that's mindfulness. That's a lot. The diabetes part, of course, you get. But you might be wondering now, what's mindfulness got to do with diabetes? Well, it turns out actually a lot. And for me personally, it took me a long time to realize how much they have in common when I first started meditation practice. I actually kind of saw them as completely separate parts of my life. But the thing is, what mindfulness is actually attempting to work on from its roots 2,500 years ago, what it's attempting to work on is at the very core of the same things we struggle with diabetes. So in a moment, I'm actually going to ask you to pause the video and just for 60 seconds, free write some of the words that come to mind for you when you think about what sucks about diabetes. So your prompt is, what sucks about diabetes? And you just write on a list, whether on paper or on your computer, whatever comes to mind for about 60 seconds, and maybe specific items. So I'll let you pause now and do that little exercise. Okay. I'm going to assume that you're back from your pause now. You can also do that later if you didn't have time to do it now. So, okay. Next step is to make 3 different columns with the following phrases as headers for each column. So the first phrase, discomfort and uneasiness. Discomfort and uneasiness. That's the first column. The second column, everything is always changing. And the third column, me and my diabetes are heavily influenced by factors I can't control. So I'll say those 3 columns again. Discomfort and uneasiness. Everything is always changing. And me and my diabetes are heavily influenced by factors I can't control. Okay, so you're going to make those 3 columns. And what you're going to do next, and again, we'll take a pause, is take that list that you have from the first exercise of all the things that suck about diabetes and do your best to put each of those in one of those columns in the list. They might belong to multiple, and that's okay too. And if it feels like one really doesn't fit in any of the columns, that's all right as well. But do your best to try to fit those in somewhere in the list. So I'll give you a second to pause again now. Okay. So, assuming we're back, curious about your experience putting these different items into these 3 columns. So I'll bet most of the difficulties you listed fit into one of those columns. And if they don't, it might be because we're looking at things a little bit differently. I imagine if you dig deeper and really ask what's so hard about what you listed that felt like it didn't fit, you might be able to reduce it to something that fits in one of those columns. So why these columns, you might ask? Well, actually, these columns are at the core of mindfulness practice, what we're trying to develop a different relationship with over time. So these 3 things that we struggle with a lot as people with diabetes are actually things that everybody in their own way with other things also struggle with. So this discomfort, or sometimes we might say dis-ease, something just not feeling right with the way that things are, the fact that everything is always changing, and this fact that we're so interconnected with everything that sometimes things feel a little out of our control. So this lack of control. this lack of solidity in a way. So these three things are actually at the core of mindfulness practice that we're hoping to investigate and look into and develop a different relationship with. So sometimes, we might get an idea from guided meditations without these kinds of backgrounds that, I'm supposed to just count to 10 and do my best not getting distracted as I count 10 breaths. But it's actually in the process of getting distracted over and over and being curious about that. Why am I getting distracted? What am I getting distracted with? What does it feel like when I get distracted? Those kinds of investigative questions that help us be a little bit more free with our experience. So not free from our experience. We don't just magically stop getting distracted or stop feeling uncomfortable or stop the world from changing, but we develop a different relationship with these things that are just part of our life that helps it to not feel so at odds with our experience. It helps us to flow with them. So that's what mindfulness practice is really about. So why else might we practice? Well, those of us with diabetes actually have a particular opportunity here. And I found this early on in my practice, and I'm curious if you might find this in your practice as well. We actually face these things so often, this discomfort, this constant change, this interconnectivity between all things, that not only do we stand to benefit more from having a different relationship with them than most people do, but also a lot of the skills we learned in diabetes management become directly relevant to mindfulness practice. So we kind of start off ahead a little bit. Things like remembering to come back to our blood sugar or remembering to consider what's happening right now. Noticing how our body is feeling or our quality of mind at a certain moment so that we can be attuned to whether we need to make adjustments in our diabetes care. Also, just having restraint at certain moments to make sure that we have the best possible outcome for our life and for our blood sugar. These are all things that are really important, relevant skills to life with diabetes and to developing a strong mindfulness practice. So you've already got kind of a leg up. And it also works the other way too, that as we start to practice these things as part of a mindfulness practice, they translate directly back to our life with diabetes. But there's also something a little bit kind of deeper and more core here. Maybe a lot of you know that people with diabetes, it's sometimes estimated, we're twice as likely to be depressed or anxious at some point in our lives, or at multiple points. I know I myself have struggled with depression in the past, and perhaps you've struggled with one of these as well. So research has actually shown that a regular mindfulness practice can be as effective at working with the symptoms of anxiety as medication can. And it's also shown that mindfulness practice can reduce the amount of diabetes distress somebody feels over time. And it also helps us improve other cognitive skills like attention and memory, which I don't know about you, but I certainly feel like I could use a little bonus points of. Other practices that we'll work on later in the course also help people feel more connected to others and feel more positive throughout their day. So these are some of the reasons why you might begin this investigation. But ultimately, you're going to have to see for yourself. Why am I doing this? What is this for? Is it helping? How does my experience change? These are all good questions to ask yourself along the way. And with that said, enough talk. So like I said before, this 5-week course is about you defining mindfulness in your own experience. So now we can start working on that. At a time that's right for you, you can go on to the next video and we'll do a short practice to begin this process of defining it in your own experience, or to pick up wherever you left off with whatever practice you've done so far. It's really exciting to be on this journey together. Please feel free to reach out as well through the comments section or through my contact on the Diabetes Sangha website. And I look forward to growing and practicing together.